Hey friends, JC Planis, election lawyer, professor of election law, here to talk to you about the SAVE Act. Now, the SAVE Act is likely dead. Even people in the Senate who claim to support it say it's probably too late to even put into action right now, and it's probably not going to pass. But a lot of people on social media keep lying about it and keep talking about why it's needed. First of all, it's not needed. In fact, it's based on a lie. It's based on the lie that there was voter fraud. We really haven't found voter fraud. I know this because I used to be a Republican election lawyer, and in both 2008 and 2012, we had private investigators in the field looking for people with fake IDs, looking for people who had falsified their data to vote, looking for people who weren't citizens voting, and we never found that. We never found any of that. But the SAVE Act is complete voter suppression. It's not an election integrity bill. Let's talk about the proof of citizenship. Now, people keep talking about the fact that we found non-citizens voting in New Jersey, but these are people who, when they applied for their driver's license, checked off the fact that they were not citizens. This was an error by New Jersey, not people trying to game the system. Now, we found about a couple thousand voters who weren't citizens who registered, and it's not just in one election cycle, it's through the years. They also found that 400 voters over a span of time may have voted and they weren't citizens. Well, out of the 8 million plus voters in New Jersey, this is something that wouldn't have made a difference. And we have no proof whatsoever that we have non-citizens voting in other states. In fact, even the Heritage Foundation did an examination and found that non-citizens voting are rare. This makes sense. People who are undocumented don't even go to the emergency room. It's doubtful they would even register to vote. Yes, we have lawful permanent residents and people who are here legally that every once in a while accidentally register to vote because someone gives them an application, but we find very little proof that they vote, especially in any numbers that would influence an election. By requiring people to prove citizenship to register to vote, you're just going to make it more difficult. Some people don't have access to their naturalization papers. Some people don't have access to anything that would prove their citizenship, especially those who don't have a driver's license and who don't have a passport. It would be an extra step. So that's why they're trying to do it. They're trying to get fewer people to register to vote, especially Hispanics and people with foreign sounding names. That's why they're doing this, because they believe that these people would vote for a Democrat or not vote for Trump, and they want fewer of them to register to vote or to have issues. We will find that any program like this would probably unlawfully and unfairly target Hispanic voters. So that's the issue. Now, the second issue they talk about is voter ID, and everybody's talking about, oh, you need ID to go get never-ending pasta bowl. This is all bunk. You know, most of the states have a voter ID law. They have expansive voter ID laws. Obviously, not everyone has a passport, a military ID, or a driver's license, and yet these people show IDs to vote because a lot of these voter ID laws allow an identification from a senior center, an identification from a college identification to be able to vote, as well as other forms, and the person's name is already on the list, so they've matched the name on the list. The SAVE Act and the act that's going to take place in Florida in 2027 would eliminate these alternative forms of ID. So you have individuals who do not have passports, who do not have driver's license, who aren't part of the military, who would now have to be forced to get another type of identification to vote. This would be complete chaos. It would be something that would just dissuade people from voting and make it much more difficult for individuals to vote. Our current system of identifying voters works, and as someone who was even in these precincts and early voting sites as a Republican poll watcher, we don't have a problem with people falsifying identifications to go vote. Lastly, the SAVE Act that Donald Trump is proposing would eliminate all vote by mail ballot. This is, of course, ironic coming from someone who votes by mail often. Voting by mail is safe and secure. And in fact, if someone doesn't sign a ballot, their ballot is rejected and they have to fill out an affidavit saying that, oh, I forgot to sign the ballot. There's a lot of measures to stop anyone from a faulty vote by mail ballot. In fact, again, we find very little fraud even in the vote by mail because it's all caught by the process. It's all caught by the signature match process. The other issue is a lot of people live in rural areas and rely on vote by mail. Even the current executive order that unfortunately is still technically still in place on preventing the post office preventing the mailing of ballots if states don't turn over information to the federal government, that would cause chaos. And I believe ultimately the court will reject this because we're dealing with people who have no other ways of voting. This is a major problem. What Trump wants with the SAVE Act is for fewer people to vote. They believe that fewer people voting will benefit them. I don't necessarily believe they're correct with this, but we should be asking for everyone to vote. We should not have any laws that make it harder or more difficult for people to exercise their right to vote. At the end of the day, the SAVE Act is about voter suppression. It's not about election integrity because we don't have that problem. The people that think that the 2020 election was stolen seem to be using this misguided belief just as an excuse to justify their violence on January 6th. But what I fear is they're using this as an excuse to justify further violence if the election doesn't turn out like they want it to. We've never had a problem with this election issue and with election integrity in this country until Trump decided to tell his followers that we had a problem. The truth is, yes, in the year 2000, we had punch card ballots because in the year 2000, we were still using 1950s technology to vote, but we've improved that. We've passed laws that provide assistance to states. Now, Trump has fired individuals in the one federal commission that actually provides assistance to states in helping their voter system. So an agency that can combat fraud, Trump has hollowed it out. Trump is not giving money to states to combat fraud. Republican states have pulled out of the ERIC system, which is the system that prevented people from registering to vote in two separate states. Trump is speaking out of two sides of his mouth. He doesn't want vote by mail ballots, but he voted by mail. He says that there is fraud in the elections, but he's pretty much gutted any entity that combats fraud. This is all a ploy to make it harder for people to vote. Luckily, we have senators in Washington that are not falling for it, and the SAVE Act will not become law. Unfortunately, a lot of states, though, are making it harder. North Carolina just did something that made it harder for people to vote by mail. We all need to be vigilant. We all need to stand up for our right to vote, and don't let them take our right to vote away. My biggest issue in any campaign is democracy and is the right to vote. And that's why I fight the fight. That's why I make these videos. That's why I do things to make sure that our American right to vote is always protected. Thank you, and keep fighting for your right to vote.